The contract sat in front of me, $20 million up front, non-negotiable. Across the table, the human resources director, who had laughed in my face 6 months ago, now looked pale and sick. The same woman who said my code was not worth a $2 million bonus and that anyone could do it. Her hands shook as she held the pen, claiming this was an excessive amount for a consultation fee. I leaned back, completely calm, and told her not to sign it. I suggested one of those interchangeable people she mentioned could fix her system crash. Then I reminded her they had already tried that. 12? 15 consultants? The chief technology officer sitting next to her looked like he had aged a decade. He admitted they lost 4 major clients and were hemorrhaging $500,000 a day in downtime. Their stock price was down 40%. They needed it fixed immediately. I told them to sign. The human resources director accused me of extortion. I smiled and said what was unethical was denying someone a contracted performance bonus. I stood up, grabbing my briefcase, giving them 24 hours to decide before my rate doubled. The chief technology officer desperately shouted for me to wait and agreed to sign. The human resources director scribbled her signature, visibly pained. 6 months prior, they said I was replaceable. Today, I was their only hope, becoming $20 million richer. My name is Silas Vance, a 48-year-old lead software engineer at Zenith Financial Systems, a fintech company handling over $15 billion in daily transactions. I earned every line of code shaping my professional reputation. My parents were educators, teaching me to see the human behind the job title. That deeply ingrained empathy shaped my leadership approach. I remembered team members' families and understood the exhausted programmer debugging code at midnight had a life. However, that empathy made me a dangerous anomaly to executives viewing employees as spreadsheet line items. People like Beatrice Lawson, the human resources director, about to learn a devastating financial lesson. 4 years ago, Zenith was drowning. Their core transaction processing system was precariously built on ancient legacy code from the 1990s. It was wildly unstable and incredibly vulnerable. In the ruthless fintech world, they were losing ground, processing transactions in 30 seconds. In high-frequency trading, that was an eternity. They lost clients weekly and suffered 3 security breaches in 18 months. The board gave the chief technology officer, Harrison Reed, an ultimatum: 12 months to completely overhaul the system, or they would sell the company for parts. That was when they hired me. I was their 15th choice. 14 other highly qualified engineers walked away, deeming the codebase too complex and risky, but I saw something they missed. Beneath the convoluted architecture lay a clever foundational logic. I told Harrison I could rebuild it but required autonomy, an unlimited budget, and a massive performance bonus tied directly to measurable results. Harrison asked what kind of bonus. I said $2 million, contingent on delivering a system meeting strict benchmarks, transaction processing under 5 seconds, 0 security breaches for 12 months post-launch, and uptime of 99.95%. Harrison promised the money and put it in writing, signed and witnessed by human resources. I delivered the project in 10 months. The new system obliterated the benchmarks. Transaction processing time was reduced to 1.2 seconds. I implemented a highly sophisticated proprietary encryption algorithm, ensuring 0 breaches. Uptime hit 99.98%. Within 3 months, abandoning clients returned. Within 6 months, we landed contracts with 3 major corporations. Zenith's revenue doubled in the first year and doubled again in the second. They transformed from a struggling firm into a highly respected industry innovator. The stock price tripled. I had revitalized the company while simultaneously building a deeply loyal team of 12 engineers. I maintained a healthy culture of respect, ensuring nobody burned out. Our turnover rate was 0, and productivity was off the charts. Everything ran perfectly until the exact moment the bonuses were scheduled to pay out in the 3rd year. I submitted my official performance bonus claim for the $2 million, exactly as contractually agreed. The metrics were undeniably clear, and the contract was ironclad. I viewed it as a standard formality. I had no idea a corporate storm was brewing, orchestrated by someone who saw my success merely as an expense to be eliminated. 2 weeks after submitting my meticulously documented bonus claim, I received a cold calendar invite for a mandatory meeting with Beatrice Lawson, the newly appointed Director of Human Resources. Beatrice was brought into Zenith merely 8 months prior. She possessed an industry-wide reputation as a fierce cost optimization expert. This title was a polite way of saying she specialized in finding creative, unethical ways to pay hard-working employees as little as legally possible. I had never liked that woman. She had an unnerving habit of discussing dedicated employees as if they were burdensome budget line items. Her office was sterile and entirely devoid of any personal touches. She did not offer me a seat, leaving me to stand awkwardly across from her desk. She barely looked up from her screen as she announced they had finished reviewing my bonus claim. I waited, expecting the approval paperwork. Instead, she coldly informed me that my claim was being entirely denied. The words hit me with the physical force of ice water. I asked her to repeat herself. Beatrice slowly pulled a gray folder from her desk drawer, tapping it purposefully. She stated, in a painfully condescending tone, that my original contract stipulated the bonus payout was ultimately subject to overall company performance and long-term financial viability. She continued, explaining that given their newly implemented internal restructuring initiatives, allocating $2 million to a single employee was simply not a financially prudent decision. I stared at her, my mind racing to process the sheer audacity of her statement. I forcefully reminded her that the company's revenue had doubled twice, and our stock price had tripled entirely because of the system my team had built. I demanded to know what restructuring initiatives could justify withholding an earned bonus when the company was drowning in new profits. Beatrice maintained a painfully artificial smile, explaining the company was investing heavily in global expansion and that all available capital needed to be allocated efficiently. I struggled to keep my voice level as I pointed out my contract contained no clauses regarding expansion plans. I stated very clearly that the contract guaranteed the bonus upon successfully hitting specific, predetermined technical benchmarks, all of which I had exceeded by massive margins. I told her this was a binding agreement, not a discretionary tip. Her artificial smile widened just a fraction, a terrifying expression that never quite reached her cold eyes. She casually dismissed my argument, stating the executive team strongly disagreed with my specific legal interpretation of the document. Then, she delivered the truly staggering insult. She informed me they had recently ordered an internal review of my system architecture by their other technical staff, and their conclusion was that there was absolutely nothing revolutionary about my work. She looked me dead in the eye and stated that anyone with my general level of experience could have easily built the exact same system. Therefore, they simply did not feel the work warranted a $2 million premium payout. The unadulterated disrespect of that statement was absolutely staggering. I stood there genuinely shocked. I reminded her that 14 highly qualified engineers had walked away from this exact project before I took it on, declaring it impossible. I had delivered in 10 short months what previous teams stated would take at least 3 years, assuming it was even technically possible. I challenged her assessment, demanding to know exactly who on her internal technical team was actually qualified to accurately assess the complex, proprietary architecture I had built from the ground up. She smugly replied that the identities of the reviewers were none of my concern. 3 years of my life, 3 years of grueling 60-hour work weeks, missed holidays, and sleepless nights. 3 years of relentless innovation and dedicated leadership, transforming this completely failing company into a thriving industry titan. And this human resources director, who had only been here for 8 short months, was casually telling me my life's work was practically worthless. The anger boiling inside me was intense, but I maintained my composure. I flatly stated I wanted to speak directly with Harrison Reed immediately. Beatrice's smug expression didn't waver, as she calmly informed me that Harrison was already fully aware of this final decision and entirely supported it. That revelation stopped me completely cold. Harrison's, the very same man who had desperately shaken my hand in that boardroom 3 years ago, who promised me that bonus, who had openly wept with relief and told me I single-handedly saved his entire career when the new system successfully launched. I asked Beatrice if Harrison truly knew they were actively denying a contractually agreed-upon performance bonus, and if he was genuinely okay with committing wage theft. She simply reiterated they were making a sound, collective business decision, and how I chose to respond was entirely up to me. I turned and walked out of her sterile office, my hands shaking violently. It wasn't from fear, it was from a profound, deep-seated rage. 3 years of unwavering loyalty and consistently going above and beyond my job description, and this blatant betrayal was exactly how they chose to repay my dedication. I bypassed standard protocols and walked straight into Harrison's executive office suite. His executive assistant nervously tried to intercept me, but I completely ignored her protests and pushed his heavy mahogany door open. Harrison looked up from his dual monitors, clearly startled. He began to say he was in the middle of an important conference call, but I cut him off immediately, demanding to know if he had personally approved the decision to deny my earned bonus. To his minimal credit, he at least had the basic decency to look deeply uncomfortable. He sighed heavily, weakly claiming the situation was very complicated. I slammed my hands down on his desk, leaning in close, and told him it was not complicated at all. We had a legally binding contract. I had met every single impossible condition he had set. He owed me $2 million. Harrison claimed Beatrice presented an incredibly compelling financial case. He threw his hands up in a gesture of defeat, claiming his hands were completely tied. I stared at him with absolute disgust. I told him quietly that he was absolutely right. It was a business decision. And with that, I reached into my leather bag and pulled out my official resignation letter. I dropped it squarely in the center of his desk. I informed him that I was resigning, effective immediately. Harrison's face instantly drained of all color. He frantically stood up, begging me not to be hasty. I told him there was absolutely nothing left to discuss. Desperate to regain control, Harrison shouted after me, threatening my professional reference. I paused, looking back over my shoulder with a look of pure pity. I reminded him I now possessed a heavily documented 3-year track record of single-handedly transforming a failing enterprise into an industry leader. I told him with absolute certainty that I did not need his worthless recommendation. I walked out of his office forever. I packed up my personal belongings and said goodbye to my team. I walked out of the towering glass doors of Zenith Financial Systems for the final time. The very evening I walked out of Zenith Financial Systems, I did not go home and wallow in regret. I poured a single glass of bourbon, opened my laptop, and immediately got to work. I systematically began calling every professional contact I had painstakingly cultivated over my 2 decades in the tech industry. I reached out to former colleagues, old friends from graduate school, and powerful industry professionals. My pitch was simple, direct, and confident. I informed them I was officially going independent, launching a boutique consulting firm specializing strictly in highly complex, custom software development and advanced system architecture. I emphasized that I was exclusively taking on top-tier financial technology projects. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Within a single week of leaving Zenith, I aggressively secured 3 lucrative contracts. They were relatively small, highly focused projects, but they were for incredibly prestigious, high-visibility clients. Major investment banks and private equity firms well aware of the miraculous transformation I had orchestrated at Zenith. They desperately wanted similar, cutting-edge results for their own failing systems. Within a month of my abrupt departure, I officially incorporated my consulting firm, Vance Technologies. Initially, it was just myself and 2 specialized independent contractors working frantically out of my cramped apartment. However, the work was incredibly solid, and our reputation for delivering flawless, secure code grew exponentially. Within 3 short months, business expanded so rapidly that I secured a modest office space and hired 5 full-time senior engineers. The most satisfying part of this rapid expansion was that 4 of those new hires were brilliant engineers directly from my old, beloved team at Zenith. They had grown profoundly disgusted with the toxic corporate direction the company had taken after my exit that they eagerly quit to join me. Fiona Davies was the first to make the jump. bringing her incredible talent and sharp wit to my new venture. During her interview, she detailed the absolute nightmares Zenith had become. She explained management immediately attempted to ruthlessly double their heavy workloads the day after I left. They were coldly instructed to step up and maintain the exact same level of high productivity, despite losing their core leadership and receiving zero corresponding compensation. She confessed she only managed to last 6 agonizing weeks in that exploitative environment before she simply could not take the disrespect anymore. The other 3 engineers who followed her shared remarkably similar, depressing stories of corporate greed and gross mismanagement. Zenith was foolishly squeezing every last drop of productivity out of my former team while giving them absolutely nothing in return. It was a classic, fatal case of corporate short-sightedness, but that toxic environment was entirely their problem now. I was purposefully building something vastly better, a firm where brilliant people were genuinely valued, compensated fairly for their expertise, and treated with the deep respect they deserved. Business was exceptionally good. Our revenue was incredibly steady, and our client roster was growing with prestigious names. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I received a phone call from an entirely unexpected source. It was Reginald Thorne, one of Zenith's most powerful original board members. He bypassed pleasantries, stating he was calling because the company was in absolute crisis mode, and he personally spent the last 3 days thoroughly reviewing the exact circumstances surrounding my abrupt departure. Reginald surprisingly agreed without hesitation. He bluntly stated the executive decision to completely deny my earned bonus was incredibly short-sighted and entirely unethical. He explained he was traveling extensively in Asia when the decision was finalized and was not part of the internal discussion. He assured me if he had been present, he would have violently opposed it. He continued, stating he personally reviewed my original contract with his private legal counsel and confirmed I was legally entitled to every penny of that $2 million. He called the company's restructuring excuse total nonsense and stated he wanted to personally make this right. I asked him how he planned to do that, considering the company was actively crashing, and a $2 million promise meant absolutely nothing if Zenith filed for bankruptcy by Friday. Reginald didn't miss a beat. He said that was exactly why he desperately needed me to help them fix the system. He clarified he wasn't asking for charity. This was a strict business transaction. If I fixed their crisis, they would immediately pay the bonus they legally owed me, plus incredibly significant consulting fees. I asked him, my voice perfectly level, what kind of consulting fees he actually meant. He told me to name my price. I didn't even need to think regarding it. I demanded $20 million, paid entirely up front, plus the $2 million bonus they already legally owed me. Furthermore, I demanded Beatrice Lawson be immediately fired, escorted from the building by security with absolutely no severance package. Reginald was silent for a long moment before noting $20 million was a very substantial sum. I coldly reminded him his company was bleeding $500,000 every single day in pure downtime. I told him $20 million was an absolute bargain. I told him her termination was entirely non-negotiable. She deeply disrespected me, actively stole from me, and clearly demonstrated she lacked the basic competency to understand how to value the technical talent that actually made the company function. She goes, or I don't help. He paused again, then said he needed to immediately discuss these unprecedented terms with the rest of the board. I gave him exactly 24 hours, threatening to accept a massive project in Singapore the following day that would keep me entirely occupied for the next 6 months. He called back in exactly 4 hours. He stated they accepted all of my terms without modification. Beatrice was being officially terminated that very afternoon, and contracts were being drawn up immediately. Before he could hang up, I added one final condition. I demanded the engineers from my old team still suffering at Zenith immediately receive massive percentage raises, and the full performance bonuses cruelly withheld from them. Reginald didn't hesitate. He simply said, "Done." Exactly 2 days after my phone call with Reginald Thorne, I calmly walked back through the towering glass doors of Zenith Financial Systems. I was no longer an undervalued employee desperately seeking recognition for my grueling 60-hour work weeks. I was returning as a highly sought-after, independent consultant whose specialized expertise was currently valued at a staggering $20 million. The atmosphere in the executive conference room was incredibly tense, thick with the smell of stale coffee and desperation. The large mahogany table was crowded. Reginald Thorne sat at the head, flanked by Harrison Reed, three other visibly exhausted board members, two sharp-suited corporate lawyers, and, surprisingly, Beatrice Lawson. She looked absolutely furious, her face pinched in a tight, angry scowl, glaring at me like she wanted to physically attack me the moment I walked through the heavy wooden door. I calmly set my leather briefcase on the table and took a seat across the table. The absolute moment I sat down, Beatrice leaned forward, her voice shaking with barely contained rage, and aggressively declared, "My demands were nothing short of criminal extortion." She wildly accused me of unethical price gouging, claiming $20 million for consultation services was an unconscionable sum of money. I didn't flinch. I slowly opened my briefcase, pulled out a sleek silver pen, and looked directly into her furious eyes. I calmly suggested if she felt the price was too high, she simply shouldn't hire me. I intentionally echoed her own deeply insulting words back to her. Reminding her, she confidently assured me there were plenty of people who could easily do this highly complex work. I specifically emphasized her exact phrasing, asking if anyone could indeed do it. Why was their billion-dollar company currently burning to the ground while they frantically begged for my help? Her face flushed a violent, mottled red. Before she could launch into another tirade, Reginald Thorne smoothly cut in. His voice was dangerously calm, entirely devoid of any emotion, as he informed Beatrice she was officially no longer a part of this critical discussion or the company itself. He stated, in front of the entire board, that building security was currently waiting outside the door to physically escort her out of the building. He declared her termination effective immediately. The color instantly drained from Beatrice's face, leaving her a sickly pale white. She frantically looked around the large table, stammering they couldn't possibly do this to an executive. Reginald coldly corrected her, stating they absolutely could, and they already had. He mercilessly outlined how her deeply arrogant decision to deny my contractually obligated bonus directly cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue and very nearly destroyed the entire enterprise. He told her she was completely done in the industry. She desperately looked to Harrison for support, but he firmly stared down at his hands, entirely unwilling to meet her panicked gaze. Realizing she was completely defeated, she aggressively grabbed her designer bag and stormed out of the room, violently slamming the heavy door shut. I immediately brought in my dedicated team from Vance Technologies, including Fiona and the other brilliant engineers who originally helped me build the system. We essentially moved into the Zenith offices, working grueling 20-hour shifts for 6 straight days. The sabotage was incredibly sophisticated, but ultimately flawed. Desmond knew just enough to be incredibly dangerous, but he fundamentally hadn't understood the deeper, proprietary architecture I designed. He successfully corrupted the surface-level processing code, causing the massive outage, but he hadn't managed to touch the underlying foundational framework simply because he literally didn't have the advanced mathematical knowledge to damage it. That framework was entirely based on proprietary algorithms I personally developed. We aggressively rebuilt the damaged sections, implemented incredibly strict new authentication and access controls, and added highly advanced artificial intelligence monitoring systems designed to instantly flag and block suspicious code changes. On the 7th day, at exactly 3 in the morning, we confidently brought the entire system back online. We closely monitored the dashboards. Transaction processing was fully operational. Security protocols were highly active. Backup systems were completely restored and mathematically verified. The uptime was perfectly stable. I called Harrison, waking him up, and told him we were live and to start running massive stress tests. Over the next 12 hours, the Zenith system flawlessly processed 3 entire days' worth of backlogged, highly complex transactions. Everything ran perfectly smoothly. In fact, the new security protocols I added actually significantly improved the overall processing performance. By that evening, a deeply relieved Harrison was standing in my temporary office. Looking 20 years younger, he profusely thanked me, admitting I saved them yet again. I coldly reminded him I simply did the exact job he paid me to do. He offered a massive, desperate apology, admitting denying my bonus was horribly wrong, and listening to Beatrice instead of trusting my expertise was the stupidest mistake of his career. I simply agreed with him. He then made a desperate offer, practically begging me to return to Zenith as the new chief technology officer, offering to let me name my salary, providing a massive equity package, and promising complete, unchecked autonomy. I considered it for a moment, but realized something profound shifted in me. I politely declined, explaining I built something far better at Vance Technologies, a culture where brilliant people were genuinely valued, fairly compensated, and deeply respected. I told him to take care of the engineers who stayed loyal through this mess, to pay them what they were actually worth, and to never let another Beatrice Lawson near his company again. We shook hands, and I walked out, my $20 million fully secured, before I officially left the Zenith Financial Systems building for the absolute final time. I made it a point to gather the remnants of my old engineering team one last time in the main conference room. These were the dedicated, hard-working individuals who chose to stay at Zenith through the absolute worst of the crisis, driven either by desperate financial necessity, a misplaced sense of corporate loyalty, or simply the paralyzing inertia of fearing change. I looked around the room at their exhausted, deeply relieved faces. I sincerely commended them for their incredible dedication, telling them they did exceptionally good work under completely impossible, highly toxic circumstances. I praised them for holding the crumbling infrastructure together as best they could while management actively worked against them. I assured them their hard work truly mattered and firmly reminded them I personally ensured they were finally receiving the massive financial compensation and bonuses they had long been denied. But I left them with one crucial, overriding piece of professional advice. I looked each of them in the eye and told them to never forget their inherent value as brilliant engineers and human beings is never determined by whether a massive, faceless corporation chooses to recognize it. I urged them to deeply internalize their worth, entirely independent of any employer's flawed, profit-driven validation. Following the incredibly lucrative Zenith contract, Vance Technologies didn't just survive, we absolutely thrived on an unprecedented scale. The massive, immediate injection of $22 million in liquid capital allowed us to rapidly and aggressively expand our operations without taking on a single dime of outside venture capital debt. We quickly moved out of our cramped starter office and signed a long-term lease on a beautiful, sprawling workspace in the heart of the city. We went on a massive hiring spree, aggressively recruiting 15 more top-tier engineers. We specifically targeted individuals who were highly skilled but felt deeply undervalued and exploited at their current corporate jobs. We took on significantly larger, incredibly complex architectural projects that other consulting firms were too intimidated to even bid on. But far more importantly than the rapid financial growth, we built our entire corporate reputation on two unwavering, foundational principles: absolute technical excellence and the fiercely ethical, highly respectful treatment of our people. Word of our unique culture spread rapidly through the notoriously tight-knit tech community. Brilliant engineers desperately wanted to work for us because we paid significantly above market rates from day one and treated them like highly valued human beings, not disposable corporate assets. Prestigious clients actively sought us out and aggressively bid for our services because they knew we delivered flawless, highly secure results and operated with absolute, unwavering integrity. Today, Vance Technologies officially employs 43 incredibly talented people across our 3 thriving offices. We are firmly on track to clear $50 million in annual revenue this fiscal year, but the specific corporate metrics I am genuinely the proudest of are not purely financial. We boast a staggering 0% turnover rate in our leadership positions. Our internal employee satisfaction scores consistently rank in the 95th percentile nationwide, and we built an ironclad reputation as one of the absolute best places to work in the entire tech industry. We make it a strict policy to pay our people exactly what they are worth from day one. We meticulously honor every single one of our contracts. We treat absolutely everyone with profound respect, from our senior software architects to our dedicated office managers. We do this because I learned the absolute hard way exactly what happens when massive companies conveniently forget their ongoing success is entirely built on the backs of hardworking people, not just cold systems and automated processes. The original, dedicated team from Zenith, both the ones who bravely came with me and the ones who eventually left on their own, all ended up in incredibly good places. Some of them still happily work for me. Some went on to boldly start their own successful consulting firms. Some took on massive senior leadership roles at other major tech companies. But we all intentionally stay in close touch. We actively support each other's careers. And we all share the exact same core professional philosophy. Never let an employer make you forget your true value. As for me, I still occasionally write code, still love solving incredibly complex architectural problems, and still build massive systems that completely transform how major companies operate. But now, I do it entirely on my own terms, with full, unwavering recognition of my own massive value and absolutely zero tolerance for corporate exploitation. The $22 million I extracted from Zenith was undeniably the best money I ever made. Not just because of the massive, life-changing amount, but specifically because of exactly what it represented. It was absolute validation, complete professional vindication, and undeniable, concrete proof that aggressively standing up for yourself, even when it feels terrifying and risky, is absolutely always worth the fight. Beatrice Lawson smugly told me anyone could do my work. 6 short months later, I conclusively proved to the entire industry that absolutely nobody could do it quite like me, and I made Zenith pay, quite literally, a massive fortune for learning that simple lesson the hardest way possible.